Welcome back to the Gospel Walk podcast. At some point in our spiritual journeys, almost all of us buy into a subtle, dangerous myth. We subconsciously believe that our obedience is a golden ticket. We assume that if we step out in faith, the road ahead will magically become smooth, and our golden ticket will exempt us from setbacks, hostility, and pain. The reality is often the opposite. For many, doing exactly what God commands makes life harder. Drawing a line for biblical truth at work can lead to a missed promotion. Committing to save a marriage often leads to a temporary spike in conflict. This visualization illustrates the logic of the backlash. In a military sense, an advancing force draws fire that a retreating one avoids. Spiritual opposition operates on a similar principle. The enemy concentrates his effort where he detects forward movement. A recent article from Christ Academy examines this tension, looking at how biblical history's greatest figures navigated the gap between their expectations and the harsh reality of sudden opposition. Following God's lead frequently initiates an intense trial on the spiritual front lines. Moses experienced this in Exodus chapter 5. He surrendered to God's call, marched to the most powerful dictator on the planet, and demanded the release of the Israelites. Instead of a quick victory, the conditions worsened. Pharaoh responded by stripping the Israelites of the straw they needed to make bricks, while maintaining their same daily quota. Moses was discouraged by the immediate punishment for his obedience. Yet he took his frustration directly to the source. He asked God, "Why, Lord? Why have you brought trouble on this people?" This illustrates the biblical practice of lament. Lament is the passionate expression of grief and confusion directed toward bad. He invites these messy, honest prayers because he is big enough to handle our questions when our hearts are breaking. This initial shock to your obedience offers an opportunity to shift from sanitized prayers to raw honesty with God. Centuries later, David faced a similar crisis. In Psalm 56, we see him as a hunted fugitive captured in the city of Gath, surrounded by enemies who wanted him dead. David writes, "When I am afraid, I put my trust in you." He acknowledges the physical sensation of fear while simultaneously declaring a choice to trust. David demonstrates that the physical presence of fear can exist at the same moment as a choice to trust. The emotion of fear does not signal the absence of faith. Sudden opposition triggers two pathways. The worldly reaction, driven by uncertainty, leads to panic and a desire to control circumstances. But David models the biblical reaction, bypassing panic to pivot his focus directly toward God's word and sovereign timing. You cannot always control the physiological wave of fear, but you can control where you place your anchor when the wave hits. The Apostle Paul's life was defined by the consequences of his obedience: shipwrecks, imprisonments, and relentless slander. Paul describes these trials using the Greek word phlebo, which refers to being physically squeezed or crushed, much like grapes in a winepress. Paul is realistic about the weight of this pressure. He admits feeling hard-pressed. He feels utterly perplexed and completely struck down. He does not minimize the pain of the experience. However, he also describes a reality where the spirit prevents the body from being destroyed. For every external pressure, there is a sustaining power that prevents the believer from falling into final despair. Biblical resilience is found in surviving the crushing weight of the world through a sustaining power outside of ourselves. Navigating these fires on a daily basis requires a practical way to survive when the heat increases. First, bring brutally honest lament to God's throne. Second, treat trust as an active choice. In moments of fear, physically open the Bible and anchor your heart to its promises. Your circumstances will change like the wind, but God's character is a fortress of granite. When you cannot trace his hand, you must trust his heart. Fierce opposition burns away self-reliance. It forces a complete reliance on the cross and reveals the sustaining nature of God's grace. Enduring the fire produces a resilience that survives any external force. God invites your questions and provides exactly what you need to keep from being crushed.